Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning if you are on the West Coast. And welcome to the next in the series of webinars by Precision Roll Grinders on critical applications of uh, precision grinding and servicing in rolls. Today's webinar is specific to paper machines and paper machine press rolls, actually. So we appreciate you joining us. We hope you continue to stay safe as we all work through this COVID-19 pandemic together. And please keep in mind that there are a number of things that we at Precision Roll Grinders can work with you on virtually. And keep in mind, that for your other suppliers and vendors as well. It may seem like everybody's getting inundated with requests for webinars like this and emails, but we still can work together pretty effectively through virtual means. We have a chat function within this webinar platform, so please feel free if you have questions that come up throughout the webinar to use the chat function. It's open enough as well that as long as there's not a lot of background noise, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question as we go along too. We'll make sure that we save time at the end of the webinar for questions specifically, either through the chat function or through speaking. So we'll go ahead and get started. Precision rolls optimize your press section. And I want to start by saying, I've spent my entire career in the paper industry. I don't know of many paper machines out there, particularly in North America, that aren't running beyond design capacity, many of which are running well beyond design capacity with respect to speed, and with respect to maybe even the turn down ratio on the machine, meaning the breadth of grades that you have to run. If you're running heavier than it was designed to run, and then heavier and faster as well, that becomes very critical in the press section because of the hydraulic load that you're having to manage through the press section. The original design of rolls, roll covers, roll cover softness, the clothing in the press section all comes into play. So this webinar is meant to get you thinking about what to look for and working with your roll service provider, your roll grinding provider, your roll cover providers, and your clothing providers to really take a look at your press section, because it is a precision piece of equipment. Your entire paper machine is a precision piece of equipment. Specifically, your press section was designed to be a precision piece of equipment. And I fear that quite often we think there's so much latitude in a press section, there's so much forgiveness due to cover softness or due to clothing design, that we take for granted things that perhaps we shouldn't. So with that, what's the purpose of having good precision ground rolls in your press section, precision maintained rolls in your press section? Well, it's the elimination of moisture streaks. It's the reduction or elimination of profile issues, the frowns or smiles that are typically seen on paper machines because the edges are so hard to handle. And that's the third bullet point there, the improvement of poor sheet edges. Well, how can that be done through precision roll servicing in your press section? Well, we want to talk about roll shape, which is crown, and then roll roundness and concentricity, or total indicated run out, as shown here. Let's start with the cost of moisture streaks. The rule of thumb is 4 to 1, right? For press section to dryer section, the 4 to 1 rule of thumb is 4 times more expensive. And I've heard everything from 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. It's 4 times more expensive to take the water out in a dryer section than it is in a press section. So what often happens when you're dealing with moisture streaks that could be originating in the press section, and again, we understand moisture streaks could be coming all the way from the head box if you've got weight variation. But for the sake of this webinar, let's assume that you've got a moisture streak that's coming out of the press section. Again, paper machines are being pushed to run faster than ever, more efficiently than ever. Quite often that moisture target average has to be reduced to manage the streaks that are coming out of the press section. One of the ways to do that we see quite often is to drop the machine speed. There are a lot of machines out there, I should say, that are running on throughput maximized control, where the machine speed is actually controlled by the moisture of the machine or of the sheet, I should say. So this is actual data. We've moved it around a little bit to protect the innocent because, of course, you know, we're cognizant of the non-disclosure agreements we have out there, but it had a couple of moisture streaks that were really causing trouble. Through working with this partner on critical roll grinding and critical shape, and we'll go into a slide here shortly where they actually had offset crown that was causing some of the issue just off the center of the sheet, and could have been causing some of it on one of the edges as well. But by working to eliminate those moisture streaks, as all you know in paper industry, you can shift, right? You can shift that moisture where you want to run an average of closer to 7% as opposed to 6%. Now you can speed out from under that and allow that moisture to naturally drift up, the overall moisture average. Here can be the culprit. Roll crown matters. And quite often we talk to partners and they say, well, listen, I've got a really soft cover. This is a long nip press. This is an extended nip press. Understood. And there is some forgiveness in a soft cover. However, the cover softness or hardness, the cover design, the open area in a cover is all designed for a very, very specific nip width and hydraulic load. So what do we do if the machine's running well, or what do we do if we need more production? We speed up, we change the entire dynamic in that press. It's more hydraulic load. It becomes more critical that roll shape be right. All of it goes into play. You know, we understand there's felt design there too. There's cover, again, there's open area in the cover. There's Yule box, vacuum, everything going on in the press section. However, I think what we fail to realize is the tremendous hydraulic pressure differences we put on our press sections when we have to run a little heavy for strength, or we're trying to run faster, or we're coming into the press a little wetter because of something that's going on in the forming section. All that really promotes the need for very precisely ground and shaped rolls in your press section. This is a case where you can see that the crown wasn't necessarily wrong from a height standpoint, but the crown was wrong from a centering standpoint. This happens quite often when press rolls are ground on older grinders, many of which are still in place in paper mills that use mechanical ways as opposed to CNC machining. So with those mechanical ways, it's very difficult, particularly to get roll crown centered. So this being the case, sometimes we've seen this being the roll crown on a top roll and something that's offset even further or to the other side on a bottom roll. They certainly can cause streaks. And again, cover softness can be forgiving, but it's not this forgiving. It's soft for a reason, so that you have a specific nip width all the way across that sheet. If you're crowned incorrectly, that nip width is changing across the sheet because the roll cover softness is assumed to be constant. So again, we just want you to be considering roll crown, to be really looking at the grind reports when they come back from whichever roll grinding service that you're using. Take a close look at these because they can prove to be very, very critical. And use the available tools that are on site for diagnosis, and we work with partners quite often if they've got smart covers This is a case where you can see very clearly before and after a good grind what the smart cover was saying. Taking a look at the sheet through the dryer section with temperature indication, perhaps even seeing if that works in the press section, if you can see temperature differences. Obviously scanners on the paper machine, taking a look at the reducing 2 sigma variation in moisture with proper roll grinding, different felt design, those kind of things. We're going to talk about it later in the webinar, but one of the things that Precision Roll Grinders has done in the last 2 years is develop an entire application engineering team. And our application engineers are responsible for working with our account managers and with our customers and our partners on diagnosing those things and taking a look at what is moving statistically to the point of 6 sigma rigor around the statistical analysis to make sure that all parties understand dependent, independent variables, what's moving in your press section, and how to optimize that overall. What we're asking you to do, and what the purpose of this webinar is to keep in mind roll grinding, roll shape, roll roundness as you're looking at your press section. Reach out to us or your roll service provider, other than us, your roll cover provider, your clothing providers to really gather that data. And again, we're willing to look at that with you, but we would ask you to keep that in mind. Quite often, mysterious things that are happening in a press section can actually come back to roll service. And we'll talk about the mechanical service piece of it as well. So what can it mean? This again is the case that goes back to those first 2 profiles that we showed, where the machine was being managed by exception to those moisture streaks, and it was running 2,500 feet a minute, making about 50.5 tons an hour. They were driving the average moisture down to 6.2% to manage the peaks. Once the peaks are eliminated, what can happen? Well, they were able to speed up 25 feet. And again, 25 feet, big deal. You guys know as paper makers, it is a big deal. So increased incremental production was 12 tons a day. And you can plug and play with these numbers, and we can actually provide templates for you to do that. We understand these, a lot of these numbers are confidential, but if you were able to extrapolate that over the course of a year, it's $1 million a year in improved production, just by being able to bump that moisture target where it needed to be. The target on this grade was actually 7.2%, but it was running at 6.2%. So that difference is worth over $1 million a year on this single paper machine. So the economics are really big. And again, we encourage you to be working with your vendors and your partners on really driving to this kind of economic value. It's something Precision Roll Grinders is committed to doing with our partners, is the application engineering, the statistical analysis to ensure that we're looking at the right variables with our partners to drive true economic benefit, well beyond any additional costs that may be associated with precision grinding and precision mechanical work on these rolls. At the end of the day, it's an investment in your press section. And quite often, having come out of a paper mill background, I know that it feels more like a line item cost. Roll service is a line item cost. I understand that from a budgeting standpoint. However, it really is, it's at the level of being a capital investment almost, right? When you're talking about press rolls and doing them right. So let's take a look at what the return on that investment is. It should be healthy. It should be very good. So an additional $5,000 or $10,000 on the front end that reaps the kind of benefit that we're seeing here in this spreadsheet, or a portion of it, a tenth of that, is a huge return. Roundness matters as well. Again, this is an example of before and after. Well, I'm sorry, this is not before and after. This is ground and bearings and not ground and bearings. And we realize that press rolls, it's a big deal to take the bearings off of press rolls, but there's a reason for doing so. The roll needs to be concentric, and your journals need to be right. Again, the whole purpose of the press is to impart really, in a lot of cases, particularly in larger, heavier weight machines, containerboard machines that are 300 plus inches wide, that are running 60 or 70 tons an hour, the hydraulic pressure in the press section is tremendous. So if you've basically put a cam in as a press roll because it's the face of the, or the, I'm sorry, the circumference of the roll isn't as perfectly round as it can be, and you're not concentric from the face of the roll to the journal and to the bearing seat specifically, that's putting undue stress on those big expensive bearings. It's putting undue stress into the press section, because again, there may be soft covers. Those soft covers are designed to be pliable, to give a very specific nip width, but beyond that, they're really not designed to absorb a whole lot of pulsing, whether it be very short term or longer term. And again, that pulsing is really a lot of hydraulic pressure. And we all know from Archimedes that water doesn't compress worth a darn, right? So I know I've fought in my past crushing in press sections and wondering where it was coming from and that kind of thing. So again, just keep these things in mind. Is it not worth a little additional time or a little additional cost to ensure that you're not putting a cam, although slight as it may be, into your press section and inducing variation that need not be induced? And then having a hard time understanding where it may be coming from, because we're looking at roll geometry, we're looking at clothing design, we're looking at showers, keeping clothing clean, we're looking at Yule boxes, keeping clothing relatively dry, we're looking at covers. If the cover's plugged, there's a lot of variables there. So work with precision roll grinders, or work with your partners to really take a look at that, because there is data there. And we understand that you're limited, particularly in this environment, limited to resources that can really take a look at that. One of the beautiful things about modern paper machines is that there's a ton of data available. There's just not a bunch of process engineers running around like there was 20 or 30 years ago, unfortunately. Just being blunt, when I came into the industry 35 years ago, you came in as a process engineer in a technical department in a paper mill, and there were a dozen of you. And I feel for those of you out there on this webinar that are in paper mills, because you don't have those resources anymore. So reach out, allow somebody else to be that resource for you. And we're certainly willing to do that. So again, grinding and bearings versus precision ground roll, which is ensuring that not only is the face of that roll as close to perfectly round as possible, but it is concentric to the journal as well. So what happens when you grind in bearings? Well, the roll moves when it's ground. Obviously, there's play in that bearing. And the argument that it should be ground the way it's going to run is just not geometrically correct. The physics don't play out. It's going to move as much as that bearing allows it to move. And then what you actually end up doing over time, when it's done repeatedly, is compounding the issue. So the roundness that the OEM specifications generally call for is really not possible, particularly over time if it's done. And again, the concentricity is not possible, and that's important. The face of that roll should be the same distance from the journal all the way around. And then the last bullet point there, which is also very critical, is that the shape that we talked about earlier, which is generally the issue in paper machine press sections with profile streaks, right? The shape is really not attainable either if you're grinding in bearings. So we'd like you to keep that in mind. Those are the grinding aspects. And then there's also mechanical aspects around your press rolls as well. Roll life and startup comes from mechanical excellence. It comes from precision mindset with mechanical rebuilds as well. And this is just a list of all the things that we would encourage you to keep in mind. Obviously, in press rolls, there's vacuum boxes and rolls. But every roll's got journals. Every roll's got head fits. Those kind of things. Take the time to take a look at what your roll service provider is handing back to you when your rolls are serviced. Precision maintenance is more than just precision grinding. It's OEM or better rebuilds. Most of these rolls have been around for a while, so people understand the designs. There's always improvements in seals. There's always improvements in what we can do with showers. There's always improvements in what we can do to make sure decals are free throughout the entire run life of a roll. And when that's done, there's a lot of cases we've worked with partners where we've extended the life of a press roll by double. And again, shape and roundness had a lot to do with that, but the mechanical aspects of it have a lot to do with it as well. Obviously, journals, bearing seats, these are big, expensive bearings in most cases. You want to make sure that good preventative, proper maintenance is being done. And again, this is an example that's pretty extreme, but if you've got a tolerance of 2 10,000ths versus 8 10,000ths, this is actual data that shows that it takes almost a year for a roll that's 2 10,000ths round tolerance and roundness, as opposed to just under 1,000. The deformation of a roll is a function of the wear of a roll is a function of the deformation, right? It's almost like the washboarding effect on a road. So the closer you start to perfectly round, the more time you have, and it's not linear, it's actually exponential. So keep that in mind too. Press rolls are very time consuming to take in and out of the paper machine. They're very expensive to take in and out of a paper machine. So how can you partner with someone to extend that life, to get twice the life out of it? It is doable. And just finally, we would encourage you to push us, to push your other suppliers to really show value, statistically validated value, to the point where it starts with data. You look to reduce the variation, as is shown in this infographic, to the point that we've done with some partners where you can actually generate a predictive equation so that you know what to expect every time. And then at the end of the day, it's got to make your operation more efficient, which drives the economics. So, any troubleshooting, even in a virtual world, that precision roll grinders could help with, videos, pictures, data analysis of the current process. Again, there's a lot of data out there. Sometimes you don't have the resources to do much with it. And then a joint design of experiment that both parties agree on. Hey, this is what we need to improve. This is the top bar in our Pareto chart on inefficiencies. Reach out and work together to make that variation go away. So that's what we wanted to show you. There's a lot more depth to this. We're certainly willing to do one-on-one webinars for individual customers, go into a lot more detail around the press sections, press rolls in particular. Because we're an independent source, we don't do rubber covers. We're an independent set of eyes, so we are really familiar with all the cover manufacturers out there because we've seen them independently. So keep that in mind as well, and reach out if there's a need to explore this further. We're willing to. It's easy to put this together for 15 or 30 minutes for a group and go into even more detail and be interactive where we can see each other on the screen and talk. So with that, I'd like to open it up to see if there are any questions that anybody may have. Again, you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and feel free to ask a question as well. All right, one question came through. I'd mentioned it earlier. We are not a cover supplier. However, we have partners that will send a press roll out to be covered and then actually send it to us to be ground, before it goes back into the machine. We are an independent set of eyes. We do have cover expertise within precision roll grinders. We're just not an actual cover supplier. We are international. We've done quite a bit of work with Canadian paper mills and some work out of Mexico, and we do work outside the paper industry. And this is one thing I did want to mention. The paper industry is our biggest market. However, it's not quite half of what we do. And there's a lot of learning there that happens for precision roll grinders. It's been very eye-opening for me, having spent my career up until a couple years ago exclusively in the paper industry. The work that precision roll grinders does in other markets really lends quite a bit of cross-learning into different markets. It looks like somebody's got their hand up. Mr. Munker, let me see if I can unmute you. Okay, you should have audio control if you want to ask a question. No? Okay. Well, feel free, here's some contact information. Feel free to reach out through our website to your account manager. My email is doug.thompson@precisionrollgrinders.com. You can reach out directly to me. We're interested in working with our partners to reduce their variation and provide real economic value. So again, we appreciate your time. This will be available in a couple days on our website if you would like to go out and review it or have somebody else take a look at it. Again, appreciate your time and your attention. Stay safe, please, out there as we all work through this pandemic, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks, everyone.